little dark. Hey, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Great Comic People.
How's it going?
This is Jack Vaughn and Jacob Vaughn. And last time out, we talked about, of course, the big passing of the year, which was, sad to say, Stan Lee. So many people coming and going all the time. And amongst those going, we're going to talk about some of them in this episode.
It's going to be called Dead Comic Book People.
So, Jake, I was wondering if we could start with a fellow named Norm Breyfogle. And where did he hail from? Do you know?
I don't know what state he's from.
He's American?
Yeah.
Yep.
He passed away, I want to say, in the fall. I can't remember. But he's known for Batman. Is it penciler on Batman?
And so who are some other Batman pencilers over time that he would be gauged against, I guess, if you will?
He came from the era of Tom Grummett. Who else in the 90s? He basically was like a 90s penciler.
And was that a upbeat or a rebirth in Batman in those 90s?
No, but it was definitely when DC made Batman and all the other Batman titles heavy in continuity.
And so in penciling, what are the marks of a good penciler from your point of view?
It really depends. The penciler was kind of like the rock star at one point, especially in his era. I'm sure it was. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he got paid more than the writers, but because they really only had like maybe a handful of Batman writers like Chuck Dixon back then, and Dennis O'Neil. But yeah, he had a pretty distinct style. I mean, I know him from Mr. T comics, which I don't have on me, but
we do have kind of a replica of an issue of Detective Comics, and it set in a graveyard. It kind of looks to me like a Edward Gorey or the graveyard where I saw Pose. And we've got Batman.
Yeah, that's a great issue.
Contemplating the birds flying around.
Yeah, I used to own that copy for many years. Yeah, it was a great issue too.
And it certainly has a very dramatic flair to it. Here he is. I mean, this is kind of the kind of thing we this is very common sort of view of Batman here.
Yeah, that's definitely distinctly him.
Was he influenced by the movies that had already started appearing at that point?
No, I think he carried on Neil Adams' style. Let's say Batman started to had a more campier style through the 50s and 60s, and Neil Adams was what brought him back to his more like menacing appearance, and pretty much I'd say like pioneer. I mean, along with Frank Miller, but definitely Neil Adams was what gave him more of a serious overtone. And Norm Breyfogle kind of carried on with that.
Norm Breyfogle wrote the Washington Post wasn't just a Batman artist for a generation of fans who grew up reading the adventures of the Dark Knight in the late 80s and early 90s. He was one of the greatest Batman artists of all time. Who would you call the greatest Batman artist of all time? Putting you on the spot here.
That's a hard one. I'm kind of torn between Brian Boland and honestly Jim Aparo.
Suspense.
Jim Aparo. I'd say I could only have three: Jim Aparo, Brian Boland, and Tim Sale.
And a little known fact is someone like me who doesn't know too much about the topic, Bob Kane was not really the Batman guy, even though his name was stuck on everything, right?
Yeah, he was. I think he did maybe like the first two issues or something. I think it was he had people ghost draw and ghost write his stuff. It was Jerry Robinson, and I think I heard something that Bill Finger was the one that created Joker, but I'm pretty sure it was Jerry Robinson that created the Joker.
Okay.
And Jerry Robinson was a mentor to Steve Ditko.
I think he's the top one on your list, right? Jerry Robinson, what was the time frame, more or less, for
probably early 40s.
Really?
Or something like that.
Way back.
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much, I think, did it for at least 20 years or something.
I'm looking for my Batman book here. I wonder what happened to it.
I forget what year Jerry Robinson died, but.
Well, okay. So, anything more about Norm?
He was great. It's a bummer he died. But he left his mark, and he definitely left his style, and his style will always be a time capsule of an era.
R.I.P. So, moving along. Oh, I should mention our sponsor today for the show is The Science of Where, which is global information system software from our friends on the West Coast. And of course, the motto is everybody has to be someplace. You just have to know where. On from Norman, we go to Carlos Ezquerria. I hope I'm not doing that too badly. Ezquerria. And so, Carlos, how would you talk about him besides, of course, our grief that he's passed at this point?
He's another prolific artist, and he was most famous for Judge Dredd. He's from Spain. I mean, he'd been pretty much doing comic. I don't know if he goes back to the 70s. Don't quote me on that, but he definitely was all through the 80s, 90s, last decade. He's got a very distinct style. He's done American comics, but he's primarily was big in the UK.
Now, I'm going to show a couple of these that I don't know that they're actually, say, from Dredd, but now these remind me of Rick Cobb or the kind of a 60s feel. I don't know if I'm catching you off guard there. It's just...
I mean, it's just like he kind of came from that era of like Mobius and heavy metal.
There's another one. I don't know if you can see that, Jake. Showing City of the Future is always
but he was pretty much one of the main and probably one of the bigger artists that was in 2000 AD. I don't know if he was in Warrior magazine, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was. But 2000 AD was where he got pretty well known from.
Would you say he was influential on other comics creators?
It depends on who you ask.
Was he part of a scene, or were there people that had a similar?
No, he was pretty much in his own class. I thought. because I mean, he sort of would carve his own lane, but I mean, you knew when it was him.
I feel as if I recall you as a fan of Dr. Dredd, or not Dr. Dredd, Judge Dredd.
Yeah, I like Judge Dredd.
And
I am the law.
what were the aspects that made it such a successful comic?
The artwork was great. The story was always really out there. He was an interesting character himself. I mean, he was judge, jury, and executioner basically, and I mean, he was so programmed to be so. He was almost kind of like a fascist. So that's kind of what made him interesting.
A vigilante?
Yeah, but pushed to the extreme.
And the role of Ezquerria in the comic, did he draw? Did he write the story?
I think he was mainly a penciler and inker.
Mm-hmm. Wow. He very detailed and black and white there. Pretty amazing. That good offhand, that reminds me of Steve Canyon, if he sort of met up with
Mobius.
Okay. So moving on to our another individual we'd like to focus on is Steve Dillon, and you brought some Steve Dillon.
Yeah, because speaking of Carlos Ezquerria, I have a copy of 2000 AD, and Steve Dillon did the cover. Steve Dillon died maybe a little over a year ago. Ruptured appendix in a restaurant. He was also
only been in the hospital, huh?
Yeah. He was in his late 40s when he died. He's some of his pages he did, but he also came from the same class as Carlos Ezquerria.
Wow.
Pretty much from the same group.
Tremendous movement between the different elements here. The activity. This looks like the shooting. It almost looks like Mandelbrot sets of math.
Yeah. Some people have their opinions on him. I think he's one of the most underrated comic book artists of all time. I think the reason some people don't like him is because almost all his faces look the same, like men, women, all their all the women's faces look the same, all the men's faces look the same. But whatever, I would know Steve Dillon from a block away. One thing I think people forget is that even though Garth Ennis had written Preacher, the way it was executed through graphic storytelling, I think Steve Dillon was the other half.
And the elements of graphic storytelling that he really shined on.
He was able to, because the thing is, he didn't have detailed backgrounds at all. Until towards the end of his life, he started becoming more detail oriented, and it had more of like it became embellished a little more. But for years, definitely through the 80s, pretty much all through the 90s and into the 2000s, he really wasn't heavy on backgrounds or anything. I mean, you just had a building and a tree.
That's pretty unique.
Yeah, he was big on facial expressions. He usually did probably like.
Can you share that again?
Would share a story maybe in less than a few panels.
Concise or quick?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be a perfect example. That page to the right, not that one, the other one. I mean, he could tell a story in like maybe less than 4 panels.
Wow.
But the point got across, and he really knew how to move it along with just pictures.
What was the character here?
It was Judge. It's Rogue Trooper.
Is Rogue Trooper featuring Judge Dredd?
Judge Dredd is probably in that issue, but yeah.
But really, the character was Rogue Trooper.
I don't know if that was Steve Dillon's creation, but he'd been doing comics since he was 16. So, yeah, he started off with 2000 AD, probably Warrior as well. I think he might have came up with the whole punk era.
Was he a British bloke?
Yes.
Yes.
British by way of Ireland, I think.
Well, makes a difference.
Because I believe, because I know Garth Ennis is from Belfast, and they have been, I think, living together and working together for like decades.
Who was that?
He wrote. He was a co-creator of Preacher with Steve Dillon.
And that person's name was
Garth Ennis.
Garth Ennis. Okay. This is just a month before you were born here, February 9th, 1988. Oblivious to its fate, London huddles under a cold sky like a beast marked for slaughter.
Yeah, that's a good series too, Zenith.
Really draws you in there.
Zenith was amazing.
Well, anything you'd like to add to the conversation today?
No, I'm good.
Okay, well, Jacob and I would like to thank you for joining us in this edition of Great Comic People. And we'll see you next time. I wish you a Happy New Year. And we did 3 episodes this year. And next year we're going to do 3 more. If the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise. Music out here.